Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to review the RME ADI 2 Pro FSR Black Edition, and that is a long name for sure, and also very hard to remember. So what are we talking about today? It's an audio interface, it's got USB 2 connection, it's class compliant, so it works on Windows, on Mac, and also works on your iOS devices. Does need no driver, apart from Windows, where it needs an ASIO and a WDM driver, of course, in order to work, but it works out of the box on iOS and Mac. What are we talking about? We're talking about an audio hardware with two line inputs. There's no microphone inputs here. Two line outputs that can feed in parallel both an XLR and a jack output. It can also be unbalanced if required. Two headphone outputs that are on the front, independent outputs, but they can also feed the same signal, and especially they can be set as a balanced output. What else? We also have digital I/O in form of AES EBU, SPDIF, and in form of the optical connection that can also act as a ADAT and a SMAX too. That, gotta say, doesn't mean that the interface is able to deal with the 8 channels of ADAT, of the ADAT format. It will default to the first 2 channels at any sampling frequency. Other characteristics: the whole system is a 32-bit converter system with sampling frequencies up to 768 kilohertz. This also means that this hardware is able to work in DSD, DXD, both in recording and playing back. So it's also a very good playing back hardware for people looking to have audiophile kind of playback capabilities from their computers or iOS devices. What else? It's interesting that this hardware, this audio interface, it's got 2 headphone outputs, and both can work in high power mode, which means that if you have a headphone with a high input impedance, the audio interface will be able to drive them properly, and this is very important. What else? You also have an EQ, something that I would barely use in any situation personally, but some people might find it useful to compensate for the natural equalization of some speakers and headphones. It's also got the chance to use crossfeed in the headphone outputs, so you can also emulate the sound that it gets produced when you're listening through the loudspeakers rather than headphones. So it will emulate that using your headphones. Then let's look at the menus. The menus are very simple because the interface is rather simple, and it's all focused on very high quality. So of course we got the first knob, the larger knob, that basically sets the volume of the selected output. So if you depress, you can also work on the, for example, in this case on phones 3, 4, for example, or work on the main output's volume. You also get a readout of the current sampling frequency. On the right, you have these 2 other encoders and buttons that they work in many different ways based on what you're doing. So in this basic setup, it will work to set the EQ, for example, but you can also set all of the different characteristics. So setup page is the most complex page, let's say. It will allow you to basically go through all of the basic settings regarding the SPDIF outputs, for example, the device mode, so if it works in USB and standalone mode, if it works also as a DSD in DSD mode and stuff like that, the clock source, and so internal, external, and stuff like that, the phone settings, so you can have dual phones outputs or not, balance mode, as I was telling you before, and so on. Then you have display, to of course, set the brightness. The display is very bright. It can be very, very bright. Fortunately, there's an auto dark mode that basically switches off the display after a few seconds, which is kind of useful, especially if you work in very dark situations where you don't want to flash people around you, or you don't want to be flashed yourself. So this is the setup page where you also set, as I said, the USB mode that can be either stereo or multi-channel. So you can feed different signals to the headphone output, for example, compared to the main outputs if you want. And currently I'm using it in that way. So then you have the EQ, and you can set the EQ for each single output. So basically you have the main outputs, the phones out, the analog input, and everything else. So everything can be EQ'd if you want. Then you have basically the gain, the different bands. You can select the different bands and set the Q, the frequency, and the gain with the other knob. So that's the way you interact with the EQ. Then you have I/O, where you set the settings for the different inputs and outputs. So you can get to set, the main outputs, the reference levels, for example. Okay. Mono mode if you want to. You can also get here, for example, the high power output of the headphones. Be aware that you want to use it only with high impedance headphones. You don't want to use that with lower impedance headphones, because that will definitely ruin probably your headphones and definitely will easily distort. So you don't want you don't want to do that. You can set the mono. You can also direct the mono signal just to the left channel, which is, in my opinion, very useful as an option. The width, so you can work on the width. You can work in mid-side. So if you have a mid-side input, you can set it to decode the mid-side processing. Well, you can phase invert if you want, and this is the crossfeed. And this is also very interesting, the way you can set the behavior of the DA filter. This is very important because it can really change the way the DA converter acts and sounds. So I really suggest you, if in case you're gonna purchase or try this guy, to really experiment with this, because I really got very different results in my opinion and from what I could hear. Then you have the volume page, where you basically can set the different volumes and balance for all of the different outputs. So this is what you can mute, of course, and so on. So this is basically a very simple to set up and work with interface. Oh, I was forgetting. There's a remote that you can use. So it comes by default with the audio interface, and I find this remote very useful even if I'm working out of my studio, because of course I don't have to reach for the volume or whatever else. What I didn't really love at the remote is that is, even in my personal opinion, it's a bit too complex. It's got too many options, in my opinion, for what I would love to control remotely, because I would love to have, for example, the volume control should be like, the largest one in your remote, and this remote is not so intuitive, in my opinion. But, it's just my opinion. I don't know about yours, but, that is just my opinion. There's also a DA-only version, so it's that is very geared towards people that only mix in the box, or towards people that only listen to music. That is a very good price, because you basically save more than half of the asking price for this hardware. And what is the asking price for this hardware? The asking price is about $2,000, $2,000, and slightly less than 2,000 euros, based on, of course, on where you buy it and which shop you buy it and stuff like that. Why you should buy or you should consider an audio interface like this, because of course it's rather expensive, not the most expensive hardware, but it's rather expensive. So why you should spend so much money in a hardware like this? Well, it's pretty easy to me to state that, because I mean, I compared this hardware to less expensive ones. I have here some audio interfaces that are around 200-300 euros with pretty much the same specs in terms of number of connections and stuff like that. Of course, not overall specs. I also have another audio hardware that is more expensive, like around the 600 euros, $600-700 kind of figure, and you can hear the differences very well. And I'm not talking about the perspective of, you know, the Super Pro studio with Super Pro monitors and stuff like that. I tested this audio interface out of my studio. This is my personal studio, and it's well, it's a treated room, but it's not a, you know, a top-notch treated room and stuff like that. And I listened to it using 5 set of speakers / headphones. I used my Sennheiser HD 650 that runs around 400 euros, I will say. I tested it with my Audio-Technica ATH M50X. That is a headphone that runs around 120 euros. And I also tested it with 3 different set of speakers, ranging between 150 euros, about 600 euros, and my current set of speakers, that is an Amphion 118 set of speakers that runs for about 4,000 to 5,000 euros based on the kind of amplifier that you couple with them. I could hear really well the differences between the cheaper interfaces and this one. This one is much more precise. The sound is much clearer. The width of the soundstage is much more precise and much more easy to identify the direction where a sound comes from. This was very revealing to me, and I'm not talking about using, you know, out of earth kind of sampling frequencies. Most of the tests I did were at 44.1 or 48 or 96 kilohertz. I just did a quick test with DSD, and I gotta say that, you know, it sounds good at any sampling frequencies. What I didn't like, well, not much, actually. I will say that one of the things that I really didn't dig while I was trying it is that this feature that I couldn't find a way to turn it off, that when you plug your headphones, you get the volume to slowly ramp up, which is a safety net kind of feature that I appreciate as that kind of thing. But when I was gonna test it, that I was, you know, switching between interfaces, waiting those 2 or 3 seconds before you could reach the preset listening level that I did set in order to have a comparable listening level to the other systems, was not so easy. I mean, it wasn't easy. It was like that, so you could not deal in a different way. So the only solution I found was to actually start all of the comparisons, you know, starting from the RME and then switching to the others that didn't have this feature. Apart from that, I mean, it's got a very, very clear sound. It will help you if you're working in mixing and recording in a proper way. It will help you hearing all of the details of what you're recording or what you're mixing. So, I mean, in my opinion, and this is a very, very good hardware for the asking price. What else? I have to thank Midiware, the Italian distributor for RME. and Startup Audio, a reseller here in Italy, for helping me with lending me these RME ADI2 Pro FSR Black Edition, long name, so I could test it and find out what I was thinking about it. So, well, thanks a lot for following me, and see you next time. Bye.